Once you've added animation functionality into your application using the ng-animate module, you can move on and define some animations using CSS. So we're going to talk about specifically the techniques you can use in this section and how you would then apply those into your directives coming up later in the module. So to get started, AngularJS provides three options out of the box for defining animations. First off, you can use CSS3 transitions. Now this allows you to transition between different property values such as opacity if you want to fade in and fade out, and you can go in and define different timing functions. So we'll talk about those in just a moment. You can also use CSS3 animations, and this involves keyframes. Now between the two, I actually think that the animation keyframes are easier to read and understand, but those aren't quite as widely supported as transitions. Transitions have been around a little bit longer. Animations are a little bit newer to the game, at least in some of the different browsers out there. So it really depends between these two which type of browser you want to target. Now if you're going back to a really old browser, none of these will work anyway, and you'll have to go with a different option. Now that other option could be JavaScript animations. So if you wanted to integrate jQuery animations or GreenSock, which is a third-party animation library, then you could definitely do that. Now we're going to focus on CSS here, but just keep in mind, if you do have to target some older browsers, it is possible to do that using pure JavaScript animations. To get started with the CSS animations, you'll need to pick between transitions or animation keyframes. Now, transitions allow you to define a duration, and you can even target a specific property or all properties. We'll be targeting all in the examples that follow. And then you can give a timing function. Now, a timing function is kind of a transition effect. A linear basically starts and just goes at the same speed from the start to the end of the transition. Whereas you could do something like an ease in or an ease out or a cubic Bezier or something along those lines. So there's a lot of options you can do here to give it some different effects. Now the other option is to do CSS3 animations. And this involves defining a duration for the animation as well as some different keyframes. And a keyframe really is just a change frame. In other words, a change from where we were. And I'll show you what this looks like in just a moment. Let's first look at transitions in a little more detail though. So here's an example of what we'll be seeing coming up in the demonstration. We're going to do a slide animation later on our different views. So I want to slide them in kind of from right to left, and then when they slide out, I want to fade them out. So we're going to define our own custom class called slide animation, and then we're going to tack on some Angular specific items here, ng-enter and ng-leave. And they pretty much do what you'd think. This is what will happen when they enter, this is what will happen when they leave. Now these particular properties here, which includes our transition, these are going to apply to both of these. So we're going to say our transition, position, left, right, and height. And then if you want some specific stuff, which you typically will for the enter and the leave, then you'll have a separate definition here that only applies to the enter. So in this case, we'll actually start from the right over 100 pixels, and then it'll slide in gradually over to 0 over half a second. And it's going to start at an opacity of 0 and then transition up to 1. Now in the case of the leave, we're going to go in and just change the opacity from 1 down to 0, and the left will be at 0 anyway, and it'll kind of stay there, so we'll fade it out. It'll give a little transition effect though, that we're sliding things in from the right over to the left. Now when it comes to CSS animation functionality, I really like this because I think it's just easier to understand because you see the from and the to states. So when it comes to the enter, we're going to come in and define an animation that says I'd like to take half a second, 500 milliseconds, to trigger a keyframe. Now the keyframe you can see is defined using this @keyframes, and the name that we give the keyframe is what we reference up here on the animation property. So in this example, we'll say I want to start from left of 100 pixels and go from that to left of 0, and the opacity will fade in. So we'll go from 0 to 1. Pretty easy to read, even if you've never seen or worked with this before. Now for the leave, it's very similar. We'll give it a leave. We'll say there's an animation of 500 milliseconds, and we're going to give it our keyframe name. So in this case, we're going to go from a left of 0 to a left of -100. So this will actually slide the whole thing off. and from an opacity of 100% down to 0%. So that's an example of some of the CSS styles and the classes and properties that you're going to be applying to add these animations. So let's go ahead and see how we can get started adding that into the application itself.